A literary language is a register or dialect of a language that is used in literary writing. This may also include liturgical writing. The difference between literary and non-literary forms is more marked in some languages than in others. Where there is a strong divergence, the language is said to exhibit diglossia. Classical Latin was the literary register of Latin, as opposed to the Vulgar Latin spoken across the Roman Empire. The Latin brought by Roman soldiers to Gaul, Iberia, or Dacia was not identical to the Latin of Cicero, and differed from it in vocabulary, syntax, and grammar. Some literary works with low register language from the classical Latin period give a glimpse into the world of early Vulgar Latin. The works of Plautus and Terence, being comedies with many characters who were slaves, preserve some early basilectal Latin features, as does the recorded speech of the freedmen in the Scena Trimalchionish by Petronius Arbiter. At the Third Council of Tours in 813, priests were ordered to preach in the vernacular language, either in the rustica lingua Romanica, or in the Germanic vernaculars, since the common people could no longer understand formal Latin. Literary English. Literary language is a register that is used in literary criticism and general discussion on some literary work. For much of its history there has been a distinction in the English language between an elevated literary language and a colloquial language. After the Norman conquest of England, for instance, Latin and French displaced English as the official and literary languages, and standard literary English did not emerge until the end of the Middle Ages. At this time and into the Renaissance, the practice of aureation was an important part of the reclamation of status for the English language, and many historically aureate terms are now part of general common usage. Modern English no longer has quite the same distinction between literary and colloquial registers. English has been used as a literary language in countries that were formerly part of the British Empire, for instance India up to the present day, Malaysia in the early 20th century, and Nigeria, where English remains the official language. Other languages. Arabic. Modern Standard Arabic is the contemporary literary and standard register of Classical Arabic used in writing across all Arabic-speaking countries and any governing body with Arabic as an official language. Many Western scholars distinguish two varieties: the Classical Arabic of the Quran and early Islamic literature, and Modern Standard Arabic, the standard language in use today. The modern standard language is closely based on the classical language, and most Arabs consider the two varieties to be two registers of the same language. Literary Arabic or Classical Arabic is the official language of all Arab countries and is the only form of Arabic taught in schools at all stages. The socio-linguistic situation of Arabic in modern times provides a prime example of the linguistic phenomenon of diglossia, the use of two distinct varieties of the same language, usually in different social contexts. Educated Arabic speakers are usually able to communicate in MSA in formal situations. This diglossic situation facilitates code switching, in which a speaker switches back and forth between the two varieties of the language, sometimes even within the same sentence. In instances in which highly educated Arabic speakers of different nationalities engage in conversation but find their dialects mutually unintelligible, they are able to code switch into MSA for the sake of communication. Aramaic. The Aramaic language has been diglossic for much of its history, with many different literary standards serving as the higher liturgical languages, including Syriac language, Jewish Palestinian Aramaic, Jewish Babylonian Aramaic, Samaritan Aramaic language and Mandaic language. While the vernacular Neo-Aramaic languages serve as the vernacular language spoken by the common people, like Northeastern Neo-Aramaic, Western Neo-Aramaic, Northeastern Neo-Aramaic, Central Neo-Aramaic, Neo-Mandaic, Halaula language, Lishana Deni, Lishan Adnoshan, Lishan Didan, Beatan or Jewish Neo-Aramaic, and Bazani Jewish Neo-Aramaic. Armenian. The Armenian language was a diglossic language for much of its history. with Classical Armenian serving as the higher literary standard and liturgical language, and the Western Armenian and Eastern Armenian dialects serving as the vernacular language of the Armenian people. Western Armenian and Eastern Armenian were eventually standardized into their own literary forms. Bengali Standard. Bengali has two forms. Kulti Pasha, the vernacular standard based on the elite speech of Kolkata. Shadhar Pasha, the literary standard, which employs more Sanskritized vocabulary and longer prefixes and suffixes. Grammatically, the two forms are identical, and differing forms, such as verb conjugations, are easily converted from one form to another. However, the vocabulary is quite different from one form to the other and must be learned separately. Among the works of Rabindranath Tagore are examples of both Shadhar Pasha and Kulti Pasha. The national anthem of India was originally written in the Shadhu Bhasha form of Bengali. Chinese. Literary Chinese, Wenyan, literary writing, is the form of written Chinese used from the end of the Han Dynasty to the early 20th century, when it was replaced by vernacular written Chinese, or Baihua, spoken according to standard Mandarin pronunciation. Literary Chinese continually diverged from classical Chinese as the dialects of China became more disparate and as the classical written language became less representative of the spoken language. At the same time, literary Chinese was based largely upon the classical language, and writers frequently borrowed classical language into their literary writings. Literary Chinese therefore shows a great deal of similarity to classical Chinese, even though the similarity decreased over the centuries. Finnish. The Finnish language has a literary variant, literary Finnish, and a spoken variant, spoken Finnish. Both are considered a form of non-dialectal standard language, and are used throughout the country. Literary Finnish is a consciously created fusion of dialects for use as a literary language which is rarely spoken at all, being confined to writing and official speeches. Georgian. The Georgian language has a literary liturgical form, the Old Georgian language, while the vernacular spoken varieties are the Georgian dialects and other related Kartvelian languages like Svan language, Mongolian language, and Laz language. German. German differentiates between Hochdeutsch, Standard Deutsch and Umgangssprache. Amongst the differences is the regular use of the genitive case or the simple past tense Prateritum in written language. In colloquial German, genitive phrases are frequently replaced with a construction of von plus dative object, comparable to English, the dog's tail, versus the tail of the dog. Likewise, the Prateritum can be substituted with the perfect to a certain degree. Nevertheless, the use of neither the Prateritum nor especially the genitive case is totally unusual in colloquial language, just quite rare, yet also depending on a region's dialect or the grade of education of the speaker. People of higher education use the genitive more regularly in colloquial language, and the use of perfect instead of Prateritum is especially common. In southern Germany, where the Prateritum is considered somewhat declamatory, the German conjunctive I, too, is also used more regularly in written form, being replaced by the conditional in colloquial language. Although in some southern German dialects the conjunctive too is used more often. Generally, there is a continuum between more dialectical varieties to more standard varieties in German, while colloquial German nonetheless tends to increase analytic elements at the expense of synthetic elements. Greek. From the early 19th century until the mid-20th century, katharevusa, a form of Greek, was used for literary purposes. In later years, katharevusa was used only for official and formal purposes, while demotiki, demotic, or popular Greek, was the daily language. This created a diglossic situation, until in 1976 demotiki was made the official language. Italian. When Italy was unified, in 1861, Italian existed mainly as a literary language. Different languages were spoken throughout the Italian peninsula, many of which were Romance languages which had developed in every region. Due to the political fragmentation of Italy, now it is the standard language of Italy. Japanese until the late 1940s. The prominent literary language in Japan was Classical Japanese language, which is based on the language spoken in Heian period and is different from contemporary Japanese language in grammar and some vocabulary. It still has relevance for historians, literary scholars, and lawyers. Bungo grammar and vocabulary are occasionally used in modern Japanese for effect, and fixed-form poetries like haiku and tanka are still mainly written in this form. In the Meiji period, some authors started to use the colloquial form of the language in their literature, following the government policy after the World War II. The standard form of contemporary Japanese language is used for most literature published since the 1950s. The standard language is based on the colloquial language in Tokyo area, and its literary stylistics in polite form differs little from its formal speech. Notable characteristics of literary language in contemporary Japanese would include more frequent use of Chinese origin words, less use of expressions against prescriptive grammar such as, and use of non-polite normal form stylistics that are rarely used in colloquial language. Javanese. In the Javanese language, alphabet characters derived from the alphabets used to write Sanskrit, no longer in ordinary use, are used in literary words as a mark of respect. Kannada. Kannada exhibits a strong diglossia, like Tamil, also characterized by three styles: a classical literary style modeled on the ancient language, a modern literary informal style, and a modern colloquial form. These styles shade into each other, forming a diglossic continuum. The formal style is generally used in formal writing in speech. It is, for example, the language of textbooks, of much of Kannada literature and of public speaking and debate. Novels, even popular ones, will use the literary style for all description and narration and use the colloquial form only for dialogue, if they use it at all. In recent times, however, the modern colloquial form has been making inroads into areas that have traditionally been considered the province of the modern literary style. For instance, most cinema, theatre and popular entertainment on television and radio. There are also many dialects of Kannada, one major dialect being Dharwad Kannada of North Karnataka. Malay. The Malay language exists in a classical variety, a modern standard variety, and several vernacular dialects. Maltese. Maltese has a variety of dialects that coexist alongside standard Maltese. Literary Maltese, unlike standard Maltese, features a preponderance of Semitic vocabulary and grammatical patterns. However, this traditional separation between Semitic and Romance influences in Maltese literature is changing. Manchu. Standard Manchu was based on the language spoken by the Jianzhou during Nilhachi's time, while other unwritten Manchu dialects such as that of Agun and Sanjiazi were also spoken in addition to the related Xibe language. Mongolian. Classical Mongolian language was the high register used for religious and official purposes, while the various Mongolian dialects serve as the low register, like Kaka Mongolian, Chaka Mongolian, Korchan Mongolian, Kachin Mongolian, Baran Mongolian, Ordos Mongolian, and the Buryat language. The Tibetan Buddhist canon was translated into Classical Mongolian. The Oirat Mongols, who spoke the Oirat Mongol language in dialects like Karmic language or Torgut Oirat, used a separate standard written with the clear script. The Mongolian language, based on Kaka Mongolian, now serves as the high register in Mongolia itself, while in Inner Mongolia a standard Mongolian based on Chaka Mongolian serves as the high register for all Mongols in China. The Buryat language has been turned into a standard literary form itself in Russia. Nko is a literary language devised by Solomon Akanti in 1949 as a writing system for the Mande languages of West Africa. It blends the principal elements of the mutually unintelligible Manding languages. The movement promoting Nko literacy was instrumental in shaping the Maninka cultural identity in Guinea and has also strengthened the Mande identity in other parts of West Africa. NKO publications include a translation of the Quran, a variety of textbooks on subjects such as physics and geography, poetic and philosophical works, descriptions of traditional medicine, a dictionary, and several local newspapers. Serbian Slavonic Serbian was the literary language of Serbs in the Habsburg monarchy, used from the mid-18th century to 1825. It was a linguistic blend of Church Slavonic of the Russian Recension, vernacular Serbian, and Russian. At the beginning of the 19th century, it was severely attacked by Vuk Karadžić and his followers, whose reformatory efforts formed modern literary Serbian based on the popular language, known as Serbo-Croatian. Tagalog was the basis of the Filipino language. Both share the same vocabulary and grammatical system and are mutually intelligible. However, there is a significant political and social history that underlies the reasons for differentiating between Tagalog and Filipino. Modern Tagalog is derived from archaic Tagalog, which was likely spoken during the classical period. It was the language of the Mai state, Tondo dynasty and southern Luzon. It was written using Baybayin, a syllabary which is a member of the Brahmic family, before the Spanish romanized the alphabet beginning in the late 15th century. Tagalog was also the spoken language of the 1896 Philippine Revolution. The 1987 Constitution maintains that Filipino is the country's national language and one of two official languages, alongside English. Today, Filipino is considered the proper term for the language of the Philippines, especially by Filipino speakers who are not of Tagalog origin, with many referring to the Filipino languages Tagalog-based. The language is taught in schools throughout the country and is the official language of education and business. Native Tagalog speakers meanwhile comprise one of the largest linguistic and cultural groups of the Philippines, numbering an estimated 14 million. Tamil exhibits a strong diglossia, characterized by three styles: a classical literary style modeled on the ancient language, a modern literary informal style, and a modern colloquial form. These styles shade into each other, forming a diglossic continuum. The modern literary style is generally used in formal writing in speech. It is, for example, the language of textbooks, of much of Tamil literature and of public speaking and debate. Novels, even popular ones, will use the literary style for all description and narration and use the colloquial form only for dialogue, if they use it at all. In recent times, however, the modern colloquial form has been making inroads into areas that have traditionally been considered the province of the modern literary style. For instance, most cinema, theater and popular entertainment on television and radio. Tibetan Classical Tibetan was the high register used universally by all Tibetans, while the various mutually unintelligible Tibetic languages serve as the low register vernacular. Like Central Tibetan language in Usang, Khams Tibetan in Kham, Amda Tibetan in Amda, Ladakhi language in Ladakh, and Dzongkha in Bhutan. Classical Tibetan was used for official and religious purposes, such as in Tibetan Buddhist religious texts like the Tibetan Buddhist Canon, and taught and learned in monasteries and schools in Tibetan Buddhist regions. Now Standard Tibetan, based on the Lhasa dialect, serves as the high register in China. In Bhutan, the Tibetan Dzongkha language has been standardized and replaced Classical Tibetan for official purposes and education. In Ladakh, the standard official language learned are now the unrelated languages Hindi, Urdu and English, and in Baltistan, the Tibetan Balti language serves as the low register while the unrelated Urdu language is the official language. Uzbek and Uyghr, the Turkic Chagatai language, served as FHE high register literary standard for Central Asian Turkic peoples, while the vernacular low register languages were the Uzbek language and Eastern Turka. The Soviet Union abolished Chagatai as the literary standard and had the Uzbek language standardized as a literary language and the Tiranchi dialect of Ili was chosen as the literary standard for modern Uyghur, while other dialects like the Kashgar and Turpan dialects continue to be spoken. Yoruba Standard. Yoruba is the literary form of the Yoruba language of West Africa. The standard variety learnt at school and that's spoken by newsreaders on the radio. Standard Yoruba has its origin in the 1850s, when Samuel A. Crowther, native Yoruba and the first African Anglican bishop in Nigeria, published a Yoruba grammar and started his translation of the Bible. Though for a large part based on the Yoruba dialects, Standard Yoruba incorporates several features from other dialects. Additionally, it has some features peculiar to itself only, for example the simplified vowel harmony system, as well as foreign structures, such as calques from English which originated in early translations of religious works. The first novel in the Yoruba language was Ogboju Odninu Igbo Irun Mail, written in 1938 by Chief Daniel O. Faguna. Other writers in the Yoruba language include Senator Afolabi Olabamtan and Akinwun Marisola. Bibliography. Crystal, David, The Cambridge Encyclopedia of the English Language ISBN 0-521-53033-4. MacArthur, Tom, The Oxford Companion to the English Language, ISBN 0-19-280637-8. MacArthur, Tom, The English Languages ISBN 0-521-48582-7.